Inside Pelican Bay, where silence screams and time stops. The silence was so heavy inside Pelican Bay that it almost felt alive. You could hear the buzz of the fluorescent lights, the hum of the ventilation system, and the faint sound of a man talking to himself through the vent. Then, bang! A single door slammed down the corridor, echoing like thunder. The guards sprinted toward the source, their boots hitting the concrete floor in rhythm, radios crackling. Inside cell 214, an inmate named Marcus Hill stood completely still, his eyes locked on the wall. He'd carved something into it, 5 deep lines, one for every year he'd spent in the SHU, the security housing unit. But tonight there was a 6th. And beside it, written in dust, were the words, "I finally heard it scream back." When the guards opened the cell, Marcus didn't resist. He just smiled, whispering, "It's awake now." They dragged him out, confused and shaken. Because in a place built for silence, no one was supposed to hear anything. Yet somehow, something had answered him. That night, officers reported strange noises coming from the same cell even though it was empty. Tapping, whispers, a low hum like someone humming through a wall. The control room logs later showed no movement, no signs of life. But when the camera feed was reviewed, the motion sensor light inside cell 214 flickered on and stayed that way for 2 full hours. To understand how Pelican Bay became the prison where silence screams and time stops, you have to go back to the beginning, to how this fortress was built, and how it slowly turned men into ghosts long before anyone noticed. Back in 1989, Pelican Bay State Prison opened its gates in Crescent City, California. It was meant to be the ultimate solution for the most violent and uncontrollable inmates in the state. Men who'd started riots, attacked guards, or murdered inside other prisons were sent here, to a place designed to break communication, connection, and hope. The architects called it a facility of control. But the inmates had another name for it, the void. Inside the SHU, every cell was built with isolation in mind, 8 by 10 feet of cold concrete, no windows, no bars, just a solid steel door with a narrow slit. Meals slid through a slot. Exercise was done alone in a small concrete pen with no sky. Some inmates spent 23 hours a day there, with 1 hour to walk in circles surrounded by walls taller than houses. At first, the system worked exactly as planned. There were no riots, no major escapes, and no noise. But then the silence started working back. Inmates began talking to themselves, hearing voices through vents, or banging on the walls just to feel alive. One man reportedly carved a chessboard into his floor and played against his own shadow. Another kept a journal of sounds that didn't belong here. Things like footsteps that stopped at his door, whispers calling his name, or distant screams that seemed to echo from nowhere. But Marcus Hill's story was different. He wasn't just another prisoner. He was one of the few who had entered the SHU calm and confident, a former gang enforcer who believed nothing could break him. He lasted longer than most, staying silent through the early years, reading law books, writing letters. But slowly the stillness started to crawl into his head. The clocks had no meaning there. The lights never turned off. Time just froze. Guards noticed he began talking less, sleeping less. He'd stare at the wall for hours. One officer once said, Marcus didn't look angry. He looked like someone waiting for something to answer him. Then one night he started carving those marks into the wall. Each scratch echoed like a scream through the corridor. By year 5, Marcus claimed the silence was no longer silent, that it was breathing with him. He begged to be moved to another cell, but the request was denied. When psychologists visited, he refused to speak. The next week he stopped eating. But then suddenly everything changed. He started smiling again. Eating. Whispering to someone they couldn't see. The guards thought he'd recovered. Until that night in cell 214, when he said, I finally heard it scream back. The incident triggered lockdown procedures. Marcus was placed under psychiatric watch, and his old cell was sealed for investigation. Yet what came after that night was worse. Multiple inmates reported hearing the same whisper through their vents, repeating the same line, "It's awake now." One officer later described it best. It wasn't the sound that scared us. It was realizing silence itself had stopped being silent. And that's where everything inside Pelican Bay started to unravel, one inmate at a time. The morning after the incident, Pelican Bay felt different. The air was heavier, the corridors quieter, if that was even possible. Guards moved slower, inmates spoke less, and every sound, no matter how small, seemed amplified. The clink of a food tray, the static on the intercom, even a cough from down the hall, it all felt wrong. Officer Daniels, a 14-year veteran, was on duty that morning. He'd seen everything, riots, assaults, even suicides, but nothing like what Marcus Hill had left behind. Daniels unlocked cell 214 to begin a standard post-incident inspection. The door opened with its usual hydraulic hiss, but the temperature inside the cell felt several degrees colder. The air smelled like rust and old dust. Everything was in order, bed neatly made, legal books stacked against the wall, food untouched. But then Daniel's flashlight hit the carvings. The 5 deep lines were familiar, but the 6th one, new and fresh, was different. It was deeper, wider. Almost like someone had clawed at it instead of carving it. Next to it, faintly visible, were fresh scratches that hadn't been there before. They weren't words, just shapes, circles, lines, almost like symbols. Daniels bent closer and froze. The scratches weren't random. They were patterns, perfectly spaced, almost rhythmic. Like something had been tapping from the other side of the wall. He called for backup. 2 more officers came in, and when they touched the wall, they swore they could feel a faint vibration, like a heartbeat. They wrote it off as nerves. But when they checked the cell next to Marcus's, cell 215, they found its occupant curled up in the corner, shaking. His name was Richard Red Alvarez, a lifer with a history of violence but known for being tough. That day Red was trembling like a child.
He said, "It kept knocking, man. From inside the wall. I told it to stop, but it just laughed." The officers dismissed him, but they noted the detail in the log. Still, something about that statement stuck with Daniels. Pelican Bay wasn't a place for superstitions. It was concrete, metal, and routine. But Red wasn't the only one who claimed to hear it. Over the next few days, reports from different sections of the SHU started piling up. Low whispers, taps, voices repeating the same phrase Marcus had said. "It's awake now." Psychologists were called in. They said it was collective sensory deprivation. Too much isolation, too little light, the mind turning inward. But the guards who worked there every day knew better. They could feel it too, that strange energy hanging in the air, the static that crawled under your skin. Meanwhile, Marcus Hill was transferred to the psychiatric unit for observation. He refused to talk, refused to eat. He'd just sit, motionless, staring at the mirror in a cell. When one doctor finally got him to speak, Marcus only said one thing. "You locked it in there, and now it wants out." The doctor assumed he meant another inmate, but Marcus smiled faintly. "No, you don't understand. It's not a man." Back inside the SHU, the strange incidents grew. Doors opening on their own. Security lights flickering at the same hour every night. The motion detectors in cell 214 continued to activate despite being sealed. Maintenance checked the wiring 3 times. Nothing was wrong. Daniel started having nightmares. He'd dream of the corridor, empty and endless, with the sound of footsteps behind him. But when he turned around, no one was there. He began writing in his log at odd hours, just to stay awake. "Something is moving in the silence," he wrote. "Something that doesn't want to be seen." A week later, things escalated. During routine head count, 2 officers reported hearing a loud bang from cell 217. When they rushed in, they found the inmate inside pounding his head against the wall, screaming, "Make it stop. It won't stop whispering my name." He was restrained and taken to the infirmary, but before being sedated, he said one last thing. It said Marcus opened the door. That's when the administration decided to close down that entire SHU block for investigation. Cameras were installed in every corner. For 48 hours, they monitored the empty hallway, waiting for something, anything, to happen. At first, nothing did. Just the cold hum of machinery and the occasional flicker of fluorescent light. But at exactly 3:17 a.m., the camera feed in front of cell 214 glitched, static, distortion, then black. When it came back online, the door to 214 was slightly open. No one had entered. No keycards were used. But the steel door, built to withstand force, had unlocked itself. When Daniel saw the footage, he froze. He knew what that meant. Marcus hadn't been lying. Something was still inside that cell, and it was no longer sleeping. That morning, when the warden ordered the block reopened, Daniels refused to go in first. The younger officers laughed, saying he was spooked. But when they finally stepped inside, all laughter stopped. Every cell door in the corridor, every single one, had a fresh mark scratched into it. 6 lines. The same number Marcus had carved the night he said, "I finally heard it scream back." And that was just the beginning of Pelican Bay's descent into something far darker than anyone imagined. By the third week, Pelican Bay no longer felt like a prison. It felt like something alive, something that had begun to turn on everyone trapped inside. Guards whispered about it in the break room, pretending they didn't believe what they were saying. Inmates had stopped shouting through vents, stopped tapping Morse code. Now, there was only silence. But it wasn't empty anymore. It was listening. Warden Keller called for a full lockdown. No movement, no yard time, no visits. The only thing allowed was absolute control. He said it was for security reasons. But Daniels knew the truth. It wasn't to control the inmates. It was to control whatever was inside the walls. One night, around 2:45 a.m., Daniels was assigned to monitor the cameras alone in the control room. Rows of screens showed every block, every hallway. The only sound was the hum of the monitors and his own breathing. Then, something flickered on the screen showing Block D, the same corridor where Marcus Hill had been held. The timestamp glitched. 2:46 a.m. became 2:47, then jumped backward to 2:44. Daniels frowned, thinking it was just the system acting up again. But then, he saw it. Cell 214's door slowly creaking open on its own, inch by inch. The light above it flickered, casting a shadow that didn't make sense. It stretched the wrong way, upward, across the ceiling, like something crawling. Daniels leaned closer to the screen. For a moment, he swore he saw movement, a faint silhouette inside the cell. He hit the radio. "Control to Block D. Anyone in the corridor?" Static answered him. "Repeat, any officers near 214? Nothing." He tried to rewind the feed, but the footage glitched again. When it came back, the cell door was closed. He stared at the monitor, heart pounding, when suddenly every screen went black. One by one, each camera in Block D blinked out. Then, the speakers on the wall, used for intercom announcements, crackled to life. Out of the static came a faint, whispering voice. It said his name. Daniels. He froze. The sound wasn't loud, but it felt close, like it was right behind him. He turned around, flashlight trembling, but the room was empty. When the intercom clicked off, all the screens came back, except one. Cell 214's camera was still static. That same morning, the officers found deep scratch marks inside the corridor again. Only this time, they weren't random lines. They formed words, 3 simple words written across the concrete floor, etched so deep they chipped the surface. "Still awake now." The warden ordered all footage from that night to be destroyed. He told the staff it was malfunctioning surveillance. But the guards talked, and the rumors spread faster than ever. The inmates believed Marcus had somehow summoned something out of the silence, something that didn't want to leave. Meanwhile, Marcus Hill was getting worse. The psychiatric unit kept him under 24-hour watch, but no one wanted the shift. He never spoke, never slept, and would spend hours staring into the corner of his cell. Nurses swore they heard a faint tapping sound even when he wasn't moving. One night, a guard doing rounds stopped at his window and saw something that chilled him. Marcus was standing perfectly still, one hand against the mirror, whispering. The reflection showed him smiling, but his lips weren't moving. The guard panicked, hit the alarm, and the feed cut out for 30 seconds. When they entered the cell, Marcus was alone. No sound, no movement. He turned to the officer and calmly said, "You shouldn't have looked." After that, the guard never came back to work. Over the next few days, Pelican Bay turned into a pressure cooker. Electrical failures, sudden cold spots, officers hearing their names whispered when they were alone. It was like the entire prison had fallen under a spell. But the real breaking point came when Block D had to be reopened for daily checks. Daniels and a new officer, Rookie Torres, were assigned to walk the corridor. Torres joked nervously, "Man, this place gives me chills." Daniels didn't answer. He could feel it, the air heavier, the temperature lower. As they passed cell 214, Torres shined his flashlight through the small window and laughed. "Empty. Guess your ghost clocked out." But before he could turn, something hit the glass from inside. A sharp, metallic bang that echoed down the hall. Torres jumped back, dropping his light. The sound came again, harder this time.
Bang, bang, bang.
Daniels yelled, stepped back, and aimed his light at the door. Dust fell from the frame as the banging continued, rhythmic, almost patterned. Then it stopped. Total silence. Torres whispered, "What the hell was that?" But before Daniels could answer, a single line appeared on the fogged glass of the observation slit, like someone tracing it with a finger from inside. Not silent. The rookie froze. Daniels stared, unable to breathe. Then, the light in the corridor flickered off, just for a second, but when it came back, the writing was gone. They reported it immediately, but the higher-ups dismissed it again. Condensation, they said. Trick of the light. But Daniels knew better. The silence wasn't a trick. It was alive, and it was learning to speak. That night, Daniels couldn't sleep. He kept hearing tapping from his apartment walls. Soft at first, then louder, until one single phrase echoed in his head. Marcus Hill's words from that first night. I finally heard it scream back. He turned on the TV for distraction. The static-filled screen flickered, and for a split second, just one, he saw the outline of cell 214. The same wall, the same carvings, and a new mark forming on its own. 7 lines. The silence had begun counting again. By now, Pelican Bay was more than a prison. It was a whispering maze of fear. Every guard could feel it. Every inmate could sense it. The silence wasn't just a condition anymore. It had become a force, pressing against the walls, crawling under the skin. Something had changed the very air in Block D. After the 7th line appeared on the wall, the warden brought in outside technicians to inspect the structure. They tore open panels, tested the wiring, even drilled into the concrete, searching for an explanation. But what they found only made things worse. Inside the wall between cell 214 and 215, they discovered layers of strange damage, like claw marks carved deep into the concrete itself. Not from tools, not from rust, but from something uneven, human-sized, yet unnatural. The technicians immediately sealed the hole and refused to return. That night, the power went out across the entire facility. For exactly 6 minutes, Pelican Bay was completely dark. No lights, no cameras, no sound. When power returned, the night shift officers ran to Block D. Daniels was already there, his face pale, eyes wide. Every door in the corridor stood wide open. Not broken, not forced, unlocked. And every empty cell had one thing in common: 7 deep marks carved into the wall, perfectly spaced, perfectly clean, as if done all at once. The warden tried to calm the staff. It's vandalism, he said. Someone tampered with the locks. But everyone knew there were no inmates left in that block. They'd all been moved days before. So who, or what, had carved those marks? Daniels began piecing together the timeline. Every incident seemed to happen at the same hour, between 2:45 and 3:17 a.m. He started calling it the silent window. And on the next night, against orders, he returned to Block D alone, determined to catch whatever was happening on camera. He set up his body cam, took a deep breath, and stepped inside. The corridor stretched out ahead, cold and lifeless. The doors were shut now, the lights dim, humming softly. For 10 minutes, nothing happened. Then, faintly, the air changed. He heard it again, the tapping. 3 slow knocks. Then silence. Then 3 more. Daniels raised his flashlight, his breath fogging the air. The light trembled across the concrete until it landed on the far end of the hall, on cell 214. The slit in the door wasn't empty anymore. 2 faint reflections stared back at him.
Eyes.
Watching. Daniels froze. Who's in there? He called out. No answer. Just the same sound, tap, 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 coming from behind the door. He took one cautious step forward. Then another. And then, the door moved. It opened a few inches on its own. The metal hinges groaned, and the air from inside rushed out like a cold breath. Daniels lifted the flashlight, but the beam flickered. Inside the cell was total darkness, thick, almost physical. He switched on his radio. "Control, this is Daniels. I need confirmation on 214. Who authorized entry?" No response. Just static. Then a voice came through, faint and distorted. "Leave it closed." He stopped. "Say again." But the voice didn't repeat. The static turned into a low hum, like 1,000 whispers overlapping. Daniels aimed his light again, and this time, something moved in the dark. A shadow crawled across the floor, fast and silent, then vanished. He stumbled back, flashlight shaking, heart pounding. And then, from the empty cell, a whisper.
8.
Daniels ran. The sound followed him down the hall, whispers echoing, walls vibrating. By the time he reached the control room, his camera feed was frozen on one frame, cell 214, door wide open, and faint writing on the floor. It said, 8 is enough. When he reviewed the footage the next morning, the frame was gone, overwritten by static. The system log showed the camera feed had never stopped recording, but no data existed from 2:46 to 3:17 a.m., the exact silent window. The warden ordered Daniels to take medical leave. But he refused. "If I leave," he said, "whatever's in there wins." He spent the next few nights studying inmate records. He noticed something odd. Cell 214 had been occupied 7 times before Marcus Hill. Every single inmate assigned there had either gone insane, vanished, or taken their own life within 7 years. The pattern was exact. And Marcus was the 8th. Daniels took the report to the warden, but Keller dismissed it as superstitious nonsense. He shredded the papers right in front of him. But that same night, Keller didn't go home. He stayed late, pacing his office, staring at the security feed of cell 214. At 3 a.m., his secretary heard a loud crash. When she entered his office, Keller was gone. The window was locked from the inside. On the desk, the shredded report was perfectly reassembled, and at the top, in black ink, someone had written just 2 words. Time stopped. And from that moment forward, Pelican Bay became a prison not just for men, but for sound itself. Because in the silence, something new had awakened. The morning after Warden Keller vanished, Pelican Bay went into full lockdown. Every hallway, every cell, every vent was searched. Nothing. It was as if the man had dissolved into thin air. His office door had been locked from the inside, his keys still on the desk, and his coffee still steaming. But what really terrified the staff wasn't his disappearance. It was what was found carved into the office floor beneath his chair. 8 straight lines. No curves. No words. Just the mark of the cell that started it all. Officer Daniels hadn't slept in 3 days. His hands shook constantly, and he could barely keep his eyes open. But he couldn't leave. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw cell 214, the carvings, the eyes, the flicker of movement that shouldn't have existed. He knew the prison was collapsing under something no one could name. The new acting warden, a no-nonsense man named Briggs, called a meeting. "We're not letting a few scratches and rumors turn this place into a circus," he said. "This is a facility of control. We control what happens here." But control was exactly what they had lost. That night, during lights out, the emergency system activated by itself. Every cell door in Block D slammed shut, hard enough to shake the concrete. Then, through the intercom system, came a noise no one could explain. It wasn't static. It wasn't feedback. It was breathing. Deep, slow, human breathing echoing through every speaker in the prison. Officers scrambled to shut it down, but the control board was dead. For 6 minutes, the same amount of time as the blackout, the sound continued, building into faint whispers that blended into one chilling sentence. Silence remembers. When it finally stopped, half the lights in the prison blew out. The power grid went unstable, and cell 214's door opened again. They found Marcus Hill missing from the psychiatric unit the next morning. Security footage showed him standing in front of the mirror at 2:46 a.m., smiling faintly. Then the video glitched, frozen for exactly 31 seconds. When it resumed, the cell was empty. No one saw him leave. No alarms, no doors opened.
Just gone.
That same day, Daniels received an envelope in his locker. No name, no return address. Inside was a single photograph, an old construction picture of Pelican Bay being built in 1987. The frame showed concrete walls, half-finished hallways, and a group of workers smiling for the camera. But behind them, in the shadow of an unfinished doorway, stood a figure, tall, blurred, with no face. On the back of the photo were the words, "It was here before you." Daniels took the photo straight to Briggs, but the new warden brushed him off. "Probably a prank," he said. "You're letting this get to your head." But that night, Briggs didn't report for duty. The guards found his office chair empty, still spinning, his radio on the floor. And next to it, carved neatly into the wood, 9 lines. Something was counting again. That night, Daniels decided to go back to where it all began. He entered Block D with nothing but a flashlight and his recorder. "If this thing wants attention," he said quietly into the mic, "it's got mine." As he walked past the cells, the air grew colder. His breath turned to mist. The sound of his boots echoed strangely, almost delayed, as if the hallway itself was lagging behind time. When he reached cell 214, the door was half open, waiting for him. He stepped inside. Everything was exactly as it had been, the carvings, the bed, the marks. But the wall felt soft, like it was breathing. He placed his hand against it, and for the first time, he heard it clearly. Not whispers, not knocks, but a faint heartbeat. Then, from behind him, a voice. "It's never silent here." He spun around, light shaking, and there stood Marcus Hill.
Pale.
Motionless. Eyes black like oil. "Marcus," Daniels whispered. "What did you do?" Marcus tilted his head, smiling faintly. "I didn't open it." "You did. Every time you listened." The walls trembled. The light flickered. And as Daniels tried to step back, his boots sank slightly into the floor, like the concrete itself had softened, pulling him in. He screamed, grabbing the doorframe, but the air around him warped, twisting like heat waves. The flashlight fell, rolling across the ground, and in that flicker of light, you could see it. The carvings on the wall weren't random. They formed a spiral, swirling inward toward a single point. A hole. A small, dark opening that hadn't been there before. From deep inside it came a whisper, 1,000 voices at once. "Time stops here." The last thing the camera recorded before going dark was Daniel's flashlight lying on the floor, the beam flickering over the wall as a new mark began carving itself, slowly, deliberately, onto the concrete. 10 lines. And with that, Pelican Bay went completely dark. When the blackout hit, the entire state prison system went on high alert. Pelican Bay had gone offline, no communications, no surveillance, no contact. For 6 hours, it was as if the most secure prison in America had vanished from the map. By the time emergency power came back, the world outside had already started asking questions. But inside, something far stranger was unfolding. The first response team found the entrance doors unlocked, the alarm silent. The corridors were covered in a thin layer of dust, as if they'd been untouched for years. Radios crackled with broken signals. Then, over the static, a voice came through.
Soft. Calm.
Familiar. "Control to entry team," it said. "You're late." The voice was Daniels.
But that couldn't be.
Daniels had disappeared during the blackout. His badge had been found in cell 214, fused into the concrete wall. "Repeat," said one of the responders. "Daniels, is that you?"
Silence.
Then the voice again. "Time doesn't move the same here." Every man in the team froze. They looked at each other, uncertain if they were hearing the same thing. The temperature in the hallway dropped. One of them, Officer Lane, pointed down the corridor. "Look," he whispered. At the far end stood a man. Motionless. Facing away. His uniform looked old, faded and torn. The back of his vest read PL Bay Security. "Daniels?" The figure didn't move. Then, as they stepped closer, the lights flickered. For a split second, every bulb flashed white, and the man was gone. When the lights stabilized, something new had appeared on the wall. Fresh carvings. 11 lines. They retreated immediately. No one argued. But outside the prison walls, the story didn't make sense. The official report called it a systems malfunction combined with structural collapse. They said no lives were lost. That was a lie. Inside Pelican Bay, the cameras had recorded just one thing during the blackout, a single hallway stretching endlessly forward, with silhouettes walking in slow motion. The timestamp showed 3:17 a.m. for 6 hours straight. Meanwhile, in Crescent City, strange phenomena began to spread. Locals claimed they could hear faint knocking at night, coming from the ground. A fisherman reported seeing lights flickering beneath the prison foundation out at sea. And one night, a janitor cleaning the visitor center swore he saw a man sitting inside the observation booth long after hours. He called out, "Sir, we're closed." The man turned his head slowly. It was Marcus Hill. The janitor blinked, and he was gone. The next morning, the cameras showed movement again in cell 214. The door, sealed and welded shut, now stood slightly ajar. A guard approached cautiously, flashlight trembling. Through the opening, the cell was dark. But deep in the shadows, you could see the faint outline of the carvings, now countless, swirling, forming a spiral that covered every inch of the wall. At its center, barely visible, were new words etched deep enough to bleed the concrete. Time stopped at 3. No one entered the cell again. The prison board ordered the entire block permanently sealed. Concrete poured over doors, cameras removed, and access denied to all personnel. But every night, around 3 a.m., the motion sensor on the old control panel still activates. The system logs it as unknown activity, corridor D. And if you stand close enough to the outer wall, past the fence line where the waves crash against the rocks, you can still hear it, the rhythmic knock echoing from deep within. 3 taps. Silence. 3 taps. Silence. Locals say it's just pipe shifting. Maintenance calls it echo. But the few who've worked there long enough know better. They say it's Pelican Bay itself, still alive, still counting, still holding the screams of men who disappeared where silence learned to speak. Because in that place, time doesn't heal.
It stops.
And it listens. Months passed, but Pelican Bay never returned to normal. The prison still operated, on paper. But the truth was, no one wanted to go near Block D. It had been sealed under official orders, listed as structurally unsafe. Yet every few nights, the sensors in that section would activate again. The system would show movement, brief, flickering, like something pacing slowly in circles. At first, the new warden, a hardened former Marine named Donovan Pierce, ignored it. Old wiring, he said. Nothing more. But that confidence faded after his first inspection. It was supposed to be routine. He brought 2 guards with him and a state maintenance engineer. They entered through the upper catwalk, an area above the sealed block used for ventilation access. The air was heavy, stale, unmoving. Dust floated like mist in the beam of their flashlights. Halfway through, one of the guards stopped. "Do you hear that?" he whispered. At first, they thought it was the wind. Then it grew louder, a slow, steady tapping coming from beneath their feet. 3 knocks, Pierce said quietly. Then silence. The engineer, trying to keep calm, kneeled to check the vent grid. "Could be pressure," he muttered. But when he touched the metal, it vibrated.
Hard.
Then came a low hum, faint but rising, like something powering on deep underground. "All right, we're leaving," Pierce ordered. They turned to head back, but the light at the end of the catwalk began to pulse.
Once. Twice.
Then went out completely. In the dark, something scraped the metal near them, soft, deliberate, dragging. The guard behind Pierce whispered, "Sir, someone's down there." Pierce shone his flashlight downward through the grates. For half a second, he saw them, faces.
Dozens of them.
Men staring up through the vents, motionless, eyes black as night. Then the beam flickered out. When it came back, the floor was empty. They ran. None of them spoke during the exit. But the engineer never showed up for work again. His tools were later found neatly arranged outside Block D, beside the old service door. On the wall above them were 11 marks, fresh, deep, and clean. Pierce demanded an explanation. He went through the archives himself, blueprints, inmate logs, even the original construction files. That's when he found something buried deep in the records. In 1986, a full year before Pelican Bay officially opened, a section of the foundation had collapsed during excavation. 7 workers died instantly. Their names weren't on any public record. The internal report called it an unmarked structural void, later sealed with concrete. Coordinates? Directly beneath what would become Block D. That wasn't coincidence. That was the start. Pierce took the findings to the Department of Corrections. They dismissed him. Too expensive to excavate, they said, and too dangerous to reopen. So he kept quiet. But the guilt ate at him. And that's when the dreams began. Every night, he saw the same thing, a long hallway with no end, lined with identical doors. From behind one door came tapping, slow and patient. When he reached it, a voice whispered from the other side. "We never left." He'd wake drenched in sweat, the sound of faint knocking still echoing in his head. Then came the night the sirens went off again. The system, long dormant, flashed red on every monitor. Unauthorized movement, Block D. Pierce grabbed his weapon and sprinted to the control room. The cameras, still active for emergency purposes, had all switched to live feed. What he saw made his blood run cold. Every door in Block D, the ones that had been welded shut and buried in concrete, was wide open. The lights flickered like a heartbeat. And in the center of the hallway stood a figure. Daniels. Older.
Gaunt.
Eyes blank. He looked straight into the camera and spoke slowly, clearly. "Time still stopped, Warden." Then the feed went dark. A minute later, the motion sensors tripped across the entire prison. Cells opening. Lights dying. Radios filled with static. And for 6 hours, exactly 6, the world lost contact with Pelican Bay once more. When dawn came, the emergency teams entered again. They found no inmates, no guards, no warden, only silence. And in the dust covering the main corridor floor, someone or something had written a message with a trembling hand. 11 heard it. 12 will answer. No one knows what it means. The state shut the facility down for good soon after. Officially, it was due to infrastructure decay. But the workers who poured the final slabs swear they could hear faint knocking through the concrete as it dried. 3 knocks. Silence. 3 knocks. Silence. And even now, years later, fishermen off the Crescent City coast still claim that on quiet nights, if you kill your engine and listen close, you can hear it carried through the tide, the sound of tapping beneath the waves, as if something deep below Pelican Bay is still counting, still waiting for the 12th mark to be carved. Because inside those walls, silence doesn't just scream. It remembers. The official closure of Pelican Bay was supposed to be the end of it. The gates were locked, the staff reassigned, and the prison's power grid rerouted. The state declared the facility permanently decommissioned. But time, as always in Pelican Bay, refused to move forward. 3 months after the closure, the security company hired to guard the empty site began reporting strange incidents. Motion alarms triggered in the sealed blocks. Thermal sensors detecting movement in areas without electricity. And worst of all, the cameras disconnected from the central grid began transmitting on their own. When the feed was recovered, the timestamp read 3:17 a.m. Every camera showed the same thing, the long, dark corridor of Block D. Only this time, there were 12 figures standing perfectly still, facing the walls. Their shadows didn't match their bodies. The figures never moved, but the shadows did. The company tried to erase the footage, but copies kept reappearing on their servers. Each time, the file name was the same, time_stops_12. A month later, a small group of urban explorers broke into the site. Their leader, a YouTuber named Eric Mendez, live-streamed the entire event. "Yo, this is Pelican Bay," he said into the camera, his voice echoing through the dead air. "They say the place is haunted by the silence itself." They made their way through the abandoned corridors, graffiti covering the walls. Everything looked dead, until their microphones started picking up faint static. "Bro, you hear that?" one of them whispered. The audio spiked. Then the viewers heard it too. 3 knocks. Silence. 3 knocks. The chat exploded with comments. Turn back. Is that staged? What's behind you? Eric turned the camera toward the end of the hall. The light flickered, and for a split second, viewers saw something, faces etched into the walls, as if the concrete itself remembered the people it trapped. Then the feed cut out. When authorities arrived the next day, they found the group's van outside the gates. Inside the prison, there were no signs of struggle, just the same old marks on the floor. But now, instead of 11, there were 12. And in the dust next to the 12th line, someone had drawn a circle, closed, perfect, sealing the count. Weeks later, a delivery driver taking Highway 101 at 3 a.m. pulled over near the cliffs above Crescent City. His dashcam caught something strange, lights flickering under the water, deep below the surface. They pulsed in slow, steady intervals. 3 flashes, pause. 3 flashes, pause. Experts later said it was probably reflections from ships or seismic buoys. But when the driver reviewed his footage at home, he swore he heard something beneath the sound of the waves. Faint, rhythmic, impossibly clear. Knocking. Today, Pelican Bay sits silent, surrounded by fog and fences. Officially, it's an empty shell, no power, no inmates, no guards. But locals know better. They say if you drive past the old perimeter fence and stop your engine, you can sometimes see the lights flicker deep inside the main yard, even though the building hasn't had power in years. And if you're unlucky enough to stand there at exactly 3:17 a.m., the air changes. Heavy, electric. That's when the tapping begins again. 3 knocks. Silence. 3 knocks. Silence. The 13th count has yet to be carved. But the silence is waiting. And when it screams again, it won't stop at the walls of Pelican Bay. It will spread, because once time stops, it never starts the same again. Years later, the ruins of Pelican Bay still stand against the cold wind of Crescent City. The fog rolls in heavy each dawn, swallowing what's left of the prison's broken watchtowers and rusted gates. The sign on the fence reads Restricted Zone, No entry, but everyone in the area knows that warning isn't for the living. Time forgot this place. But the silence never did. When state engineers finally returned to survey the land for demolition, they brought cutting equipment, drones, and ground-penetrating scanners. The plan was simple: level the remaining structures and bury what was left of Block D once and for all. But as soon as the drills hit concrete, the readings went wild. Beneath the prison, something pulsed, faint, rhythmic, alive. At first, they thought it was mechanical interference until the pulses began syncing perfectly with the workers' heartbeats. Then came the sound. 3 knocks. Silence. 3 knocks. Silence. The lead engineer, a man who had never believed in ghosts or curses, said quietly, "Stop. Just stop." He dropped his headset and stepped back, eyes fixed on the monitor showing the seismic readings. The pattern wasn't random. It was language. One of the younger techs whispered, "It's counting again." That night, after the crew packed up, one camera was left running at the site. The feed was static for hours, until exactly 3:17 a.m. Then the static cleared. The view tilted slightly toward the ruins of Block D. And faintly, behind the veil of fog, the shapes appeared again. 12 figures standing in a line, motionless. The last one, the 12th, slowly raised its head. A voice came through, distorted, layered, and calm. 13. Then the screen went black. When the team reviewed the footage the next morning, the file was empty. The timestamp was frozen. Not at 3:18. Not at 3:19. At 3:17 a.m., time simply stopped. Days later, locals reported strange events across Crescent City. Watches freezing, phones dying, shadows stretching against the light. And through it all, the faint tapping returned, echoing through pipes, walls, and even the ocean waves. Scientists were called in. They measured low-frequency vibrations traveling from beneath the prison site, spreading out through the ground in perfect circles. The data suggested the pulses weren't dying out. They were expanding, slowly, steadily, like ripples in water. When asked for comment, one of the lead researchers said something that chilled every reporter to the bone. "It's as if the silence is moving." And then, one foggy evening, a fisherman named Carl Torres radioed the Coast Guard. His voice shook with disbelief. "There's lights in the water," he said. "They're moving inland." By the time rescue boats reached him, Carl was gone. Only his radio was found, still transmitting faint static, and one final recording. 3 knocks. Silence. 3 knocks. Silence. Then a voice, low, distorted, whispering. "It's awake everywhere now." Today, Pelican Bay remains sealed beneath government cover stories. But every so often, hikers claim they can see faint glows deep under the cliffs, like the heartbeat of something that shouldn't exist. And if you stand still long enough, the air itself begins to feel wrong, heavier, slower, like time hesitates to move forward. Because what began in one cell never truly stayed there. The silence that learned to scream became something greater, something patient. And now, it waits for the rest of the world to stop moving too. In the end, no one really escaped Pelican Bay. Not Marcus Hill. Not Daniels. Not even time itself. The prison may be buried, but it's still listening. And if you ever find yourself alone at 3:17 a.m., when everything goes quiet, turn off the lights. Hold your breath. And whatever you do, don't answer when the silence knocks back.